The night
Mom,
my
this is
daughter
my
called me
night,
old-fashioned,
not yours.
she was wearing a diamond ring
Stop
worth more
making
than
it
my
about
first car
yourself.
and smiling at a man who reminded me of the
I
greatest
just don't want
mistake
you
of
to
my
make the
life.
same mistake.
Mom,
It is my
people don't
life,
do
and I am
relationships the way
happy.
you did 40 years ago,
Don't
Emily
worry,
said,
this is
laughing
gonna fix
softly across
everything
the
for us.
engagement dinner table.
Just trust me.
You worry too much. You're just old-fashioned.
I do trust you.
Everyone laughed. But I didn't, because 35 years earlier, I had said those exact words to my own mother before I trusted the wrong man, signed the wrong papers, and nearly destroyed my entire future. As I looked at Jason holding my daughter's hand, I realized something terrifying. Emily wasn't making her own mistake. She was about to repeat mine. If you've ever been called old-fashioned, I'd love to hear your story. Please like and subscribe if this journey speaks to you. And before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, what time it is where you are, and whether you think experience is wisdom or just fear disguised as advice. The restaurant Emily chose for her engagement dinner sat on the top floor of a new hotel in downtown Columbus. Everything about the place seemed designed to impress people. The ceiling was covered with hanging glass lights that looked like falling stars. The tables were decorated with white roses, and a piano player quietly filled the room with old love songs. I arrived 15 minutes early. I always arrive early. That is one of the many things my daughter says makes me old-fashioned. I sat near the window and watched the city lights spread across the dark Ohio evening. For a moment, I tried to convince myself that I was simply nervous because my only child was getting married. But deep down, I knew it was something else. I had spent my entire life trusting my instincts, and my instincts had been screaming for months. Emily walked into the restaurant holding Jason's hand. She looked beautiful. My daughter had inherited her father's dark hair, but my eyes... She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than anything I had purchased in the last 5 years. Her smile lit up the room. Jason walked beside her, confident and polished in a navy suit. He had the kind of face people trusted immediately. Perfect teeth, calm voice, steady eye contact. The kind of man who made everyone feel special. The kind of man I once fell in love with. "Mom," Emily said. She hugged me quickly. Jason kissed my cheek. "You look wonderful, Margaret." People always liked Jason. The waiters liked him. The hostess liked him. My neighbors liked him. Even some of my friends liked him. He remembered names. He pulled out chairs. He asked questions about people's lives. He knew exactly what to say. The two families gathered around a large table near the windows. Jason's parents had driven from Indianapolis. His younger brother sat beside him. Emily's friends from work filled the other side of the table. I was the oldest person there, and for most of the evening I felt it. Everyone talked about wedding venues, honeymoon plans, and the beautiful house Jason and Emily planned to buy after the wedding. Emily practically glowed whenever she looked at him. "I can't believe this is finally happening," she said. Jason squeezed her hand. "We've got some exciting news tonight." Several people smiled. Jason lifted his glass. "As most of you know, I'm expanding my development company. We found an incredible property outside Dublin. It could become both our dream home and the headquarters for the business." Everyone immediately became interested. His father nodded proudly. Emily smiled. "I'll be joining the investment," one of her friends gasped. "That's amazing." Jason continued. "We believe couples should build together. Shared dreams, shared investments, shared success." Everyone raised their glasses. Everyone except me. I looked at Emily. "Investment?" I asked. She nodded. "We'll both be signing next month." Something inside my stomach tightened. "What exactly are you signing?" Emily's smile faded slightly. "It's just paperwork, Mom." Jason laughed softly. "Business financing." I looked directly at him. "And Emily is personally involved." He took a sip of wine. "Of course." "Does she have her own attorney reviewing everything?" The table became quiet. Emily looked embarrassed. Mom, I'm only asking. Jason smiled politely. We've already gone over everything together. I looked at my daughter. Have you read every page yourself? Emily sighed. Seriously. I kept my voice calm. Emily, large financial agreements are important. Jason spoke gently. I would never put Emily in a bad position. The people around us nodded, but I wasn't asking Jason. I was asking my daughter. Have you read everything? Emily set down her fork. Mom, I'm 34 years old. I know. I know what I'm doing. I looked at her carefully. Sometimes love makes smart people overlook things. Jason's smile barely changed, but his eyes did. Only for a second. Only enough for me to notice. Emily leaned back in her chair. You don't trust him. I don't know him well enough. You've had almost a year. I've had a year to observe. Her cheeks became red. Observe what? I hesitated, because the truth sounded ridiculous. His confidence, his certainty, the way he answered questions for her, the way he finished her sentences, the way she looked at him before making small decisions, the way he always spoke about their future as if every choice had already been made. I had seen it before, 35 years earlier, in another handsome man, at another dinner table, with another frightened mother sitting across from me. I just want you to be careful. Emily laughed, not kindly. Several people looked uncomfortable. She turned toward her friends. See, this is exactly what I was telling you. I felt my chest tighten. Emily. No, Mom, really. She folded her hands. People don't do relationships the way you did 40 years ago. The table became silent. We make decisions together. I understand that. We support each other's dreams. That's good. And not every man is trying to hurt women. I felt heat rise in my face. I didn't say that. She shook her head. You always think the worst. Jason quietly placed his hand on hers. Emily. But she continued. You're always worried about money, about contracts, about risks, about what could go wrong. I couldn't answer, because she was right. I did worry. People my age often worry because we remember what happened when we didn't. Then she smiled, a small smile, the kind that cuts deeper than shouting. Mom, you're just old-fashioned. A few nervous laughs escaped around the table. Someone reached for their wine. Someone looked at the floor. Jason squeezed Emily's hand again. He looked uncomfortable, but not surprised, as if they had discussed this before. I suddenly felt very old, not because of my gray hair, not because of my age, but because I was sitting in a beautiful restaurant, watching my daughter speak words I had once spoken myself. 35 years ago, I had sat across from my own mother. She had warned me about Daniel Carter. She had told me to slow down. She had told me not to sign anything. I remember exactly what I said. You don't understand modern relationships. And later, you're old-fashioned, my mother cried that night. I did not understand why. Now I did. Dessert arrived. People started talking again. The tension slowly disappeared for everyone else. But not for me. As Jason described his future business plans, I noticed Emily watching him with complete trust. Absolute trust. The kind of trust that asks no questions. The kind of trust that signs papers. The kind of trust that gives away pieces of itself. At one point, Jason looked directly at me. His smile remained pleasant. His voice remained warm. We're going to build something amazing together. Everyone nodded, but all I heard was another man's voice from 35 years earlier. Another promise, another dream, another future. As we left the restaurant, Emily hugged everyone goodbye. Jason helped her into the car. Before she closed the passenger door, I touched her arm. Emily. She looked at me. I love you. I know. Please read everything before you sign. She sighed. Mom. Please. She looked tired, almost annoyed. Nothing is going to happen. I forced a smile, because I had once said exactly the same words, and I had been wrong. As their car disappeared into the night, I stood alone in the parking lot, with the cold Ohio wind blowing against my face. For the first time in years, I was truly afraid, because my daughter wasn't making her own mistakes. She was beginning to repeat mine, and I wasn't sure how to stop her. The first time I realized my children no longer saw me as an adult happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I had driven to the grocery store myself. The weather was beautiful, the sun was warm, and for the first time in weeks, I felt almost normal. I bought fresh strawberries flowers for the kitchen table and Harold's favorite coffee, even though there was nobody left in the house to drink it except me. When I returned home, Mark's truck was parked in my driveway. He had his own key. By the time I walked into the kitchen carrying grocery bags, he was already standing there. Where were you? He asked. I blinked. At the grocery store. His forehead tightened. You didn't tell anyone. I actually laughed. Mark, I'm 66, not 16. He crossed his arms. We've been trying to call you. I reached into my purse and realized my phone had been on silent. I didn't hear it. He sighed heavily. Mom, what if something had happened? That question had become his favorite weapon. What if something happened? What if you fall? What if you forget? What if you get confused? What if you need help? Nobody ever asked. What if nothing happens? What if I'm still capable? What if I'm still me? Mark carried my grocery bags inside. He looked at the strawberries. You don't need to buy fresh fruit. Rachel bought groceries yesterday. I looked into my own refrigerator and saw containers I hadn't chosen. Yogurt I didn't eat. Soup I didn't like. Low-fat products I had never bought. Rachel had filled my refrigerator with food she believed an older woman should eat. I quietly placed my strawberries inside anyway. That evening, Linda stopped by after work. She sat beside me with her laptop. I changed your passwords. I looked up. What passwords? Your online banking. I frowned. Why? She spoke slowly, almost gently. You keep forgetting things. I don't forget my passwords. You wrote them down on paper. So, anybody could find them. I wanted to tell her that I had used the same method for 20 years. Instead, I simply asked, What's the new password? I'll handle the bills. The sentence was small, almost harmless. But something about it unsettled me. I've handled my own bills for 40 years. She smiled. I know, but now you don't have to. I noticed something strange. Nobody was asking what I wanted anymore. They were telling me what I no longer needed to do. No driving, no banking, no paying bills, no managing appointments, no handling paperwork. Every responsibility removed sounded like kindness, but enough kindness can slowly become a prison. A few days later, Mark arrived carrying several papers. I need your signature. What is it? Insurance stuff. I adjusted my glasses. There are several pages. It's just routine. I read the first page, the second, the third. Mark became impatient. Mom, you don't need to read every word. Harold used to say that every contract deserves your full attention. So I continued reading. Mark sighed loudly. Do you trust me or not? The question hurt, because mothers are taught that distrust is betrayal. I trust you. Then sign. Something inside me hesitated. The forms didn't seem dangerous, but I couldn't understand why Mark appeared so nervous. I signed 2 pages and told him I wanted to keep copies. His expression changed for only a second. Then he smiled. Of course. But he forgot to leave them. The following week, Rachel came over while I was cleaning Harold's study. She looked around the room, the old desk, the fishing rods, the photographs, the military medals Harold had inherited from his father. You should probably get rid of some of this. I carefully folded one of Harold's old sweaters. I'm not ready. She leaned against the doorway. You can't live in the past forever. I wanted to tell her that grief doesn't operate on schedules. Instead, I said nothing. Rachel continued. The house feels crowded. The house. Not my house. The house. As if it already belonged to everyone. After she left, I sat in Harold's chair. I could almost hear his voice. Vivian, pay attention. I still wasn't sure what I was paying attention to. Only that something felt wrong. One Saturday, Sophie came over alone. She sat at my kitchen counter doing homework while I baked cookies. She was quiet for nearly an hour. Then she suddenly asked, Grandma, are you scared? I smiled. Of what? Getting old? The question surprised me. I suppose everybody gets scared sometimes. She stared at her notebook. Dad says you're getting more forgetful. I stopped stirring. What makes him think that? He says you need people to take care of you now. I looked at my granddaughter. She wasn't being cruel. She was repeating what she heard. Children often reveal truths adults try to hide. Do you think I need someone to take care of me? She hesitated. I don't know. That answer hurt more than if she had said yes, because Sophie had known me all her life. I taught her to bake. I helped with homework. I attended school plays. I sat beside her during piano recitals. And now, she wasn't sure whether I could take care of myself. After she left, I walked through my house. I watered the plants, folded laundry, balanced my checkbook, changed a light bulb in the hallway, prepared dinner. Every task whispered the same thing. You are still here. You are still capable. But when my children looked at me, they saw only what I had lost. They saw my husband's empty chair, my gray hair, my slower steps, my reading glasses. They measured my age instead of my strength. One evening, Linda called me. Mom, I added myself to your banking account. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? Just in case something happens. What kind of something? She sighed. Mom, why are you making this difficult? I sat quietly because I truly didn't understand. Why was protecting my independence considered difficult? Why was asking questions considered stubborn? Why was wanting control of my own life suddenly unreasonable? That night, I pulled an old notebook from Harold's desk. A small brown notebook with blank pages. I wrote the date. Then I wrote, Linda changed banking passwords. Mark brought documents. Rachel wants me to remove Harold's things. Sophie says they think I need care. I wasn't collecting evidence. Not yet. I was simply trying to make sense of my own life. For the first time, I started noticing patterns. Mark always wanted signatures. Linda always wanted access. Rachel always wanted changes. And somehow, every conversation ended with the same message. You can't do this anymore. But I could. That was the part nobody seemed willing to believe. Late that night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me had wrinkles, gray hair, tired eyes. But she also had 40 years of marriage, 2 children raised, bills paid, Dreams survived, loss endured. I touched the edge of the mirror. I am still here. I whispered the words aloud because nobody else seemed willing to say them. What I didn't realize then was that my children had already begun making plans for my future. Plans that involved my money, my home, my independence, and perhaps even my ability to make my own decisions. At the time, all I knew was this: I had started writing things down. And once a woman begins writing down what hurts her, she often discovers how long she has been suffering in silence. Over the next several weeks, I began noticing small changes in Emily. At first, they seemed harmless. People change when they fall in love. They adjust schedules, develop new habits, and begin thinking in terms of we instead of I. I understood that. I had experienced it myself. But there is a difference between sharing your life with someone and slowly disappearing inside theirs. And my daughter was beginning to disappear. Emily used to call me every Sunday afternoon. It had been our tradition since she left for college. No matter how busy she became, she always found time to call. Sometimes the conversations lasted 15 minutes, sometimes an hour. But after Jason entered her life, the calls became shorter, then less frequent. Eventually, they almost stopped. When I called her one Tuesday evening, she answered after several rings. "Hi, Mom." Her voice sounded distracted. "Am I interrupting something?" "We were about to leave. Jason and I." I smiled even though she couldn't see me. "Where are you going?" She hesitated, looking at furniture. "Oh. We found a place we like." I sat quietly. "A place?" "The condo." I frowned. "I thought you were waiting until after the wedding." There was another pause. Plans changed. That sentence would become very familiar. Plans changed. The apartment changed. The wedding venue changed. The honeymoon changed. The financial plans changed. And almost every change seemed to benefit Jason. 2 weeks later, Emily came to visit me. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was working in my garden when her car pulled into the driveway. She climbed out wearing designer sunglasses and carrying several shopping bags. I immediately noticed something. She was driving a different car, not the silver Honda she had owned for years. "Where's your car?" She smiled. "We sold it." I stared at her. "You love that car." "It was practical. It was paid off." She laughed. "Mom." "What?" "Jason says it's important to invest in better things." The words bothered me, not because of the car, because of the phrase. "Jason says." I heard it constantly now. Jason thinks. Jason believes. Jason wants. Jason says. It was becoming less about what Emily thought. Inside the house, she walked through the kitchen while answering text messages. Her phone kept vibrating. I prepared iced tea. She barely looked up. Finally, I asked, "Everything okay?" She smiled. "Jason, what about him?" "He's stressed." "About work?" She nodded. "The new project." I sat across from her. "Is he doing all right financially?" She looked surprised. "Of course. I'm only asking." "He works harder than anyone I've ever met." I stirred my tea slowly. "I've noticed you've been helping him quite a bit." Her expression changed. "What does that mean?" "The car." She crossed her arms. "It was my decision." "I know. The condo was my decision, too." I nodded. "And the investment—" She looked away. "Mom." "I'm not criticizing." "Then what are you doing?" I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was difficult. I was watching my daughter slowly reshape her entire life around another person. I had done exactly the same thing. As she stood up to refill her glass, I noticed something else. Her wrist was empty. For years, Emily had worn the silver bracelet that belonged to my grandmother. I had given it to her on her 30th birthday. She wore it almost every day. "Where's your bracelet?" She looked down. "Oh. Did it break?" "No." "Then where is it?" She smiled awkwardly. "It's at home." "Why?" She hesitated. I felt my stomach tighten. "Jason thinks it makes me look older." The room became very quiet. I stared at her. "He said that—" She shrugged. "Not exactly." "What exactly?" "He said it gives me a small town look." Small town. I had lived in our Ohio town for nearly 40 years. Emily had grown up there. Her grandparents had lived there. Suddenly, it sounded like something embarrassing, something to hide. I tried to remain calm. "Do you agree with him?" She shrugged again. "I don't know." "You've worn it for years. It's just jewelry." "No, it wasn't. It was family, history, memory." But I realized the bracelet itself wasn't the issue. The issue was that my daughter had stopped seeing herself through her own eyes. She was beginning to see herself through Jason's. That frightened me. Several days later, Helen Brooks came over for coffee. Helen had been my closest friend for more than 40 years. She had watched Emily grow up. She noticed things quickly. "How's the wedding planning?" I sighed. "Complicated." She raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" I told her about the dinner, the contracts, the bracelet, the new condo. She listened quietly. Finally, she asked, "What does Emily want?" I stared at her. "I don't know anymore." Helen nodded slowly. "That's what worries you." "Yes." Because when I was young, I slowly stopped asking myself what I wanted. I only asked what Daniel wanted. And by the time I realized it, years had passed. Helen took a sip of coffee. "Have you met Jason alone?" "No." "You should." I looked at her. "Why?" "Because charming men often behave differently when nobody is watching." That sentence stayed with me. The following Sunday, Emily invited me to see the condo. The building was beautiful. Modern glass, expensive furniture. Everything looked perfect. Jason greeted me warmly. "Margaret, welcome." The apartment was filled with expensive decorations. Most of them looked as though they had been chosen from a catalog. As Emily showed me around, I noticed something strange. Very few things belonged to her. No photographs from childhood. No paintings she loved. No books she used to read. No family keepsakes. It felt more like Jason's home than theirs. In the bedroom, I saw several empty jewelry boxes. "Where's your grandmother's necklace?" Emily looked uncomfortable. "It's packed." "And the quilt your grandmother made?" "Storage." "The photographs?" "Storage, too." I nodded. Storage. Everything connected to her past seemed to be disappearing. That evening, as I prepared to leave, Jason walked me to my car. The parking lot was quiet. He smiled. "Emily's very happy." "I want her to be." He nodded. "Sometimes change is difficult." I looked at him. "What kind of change?" He smiled again. "The kind that helps people grow." I didn't answer, because I suddenly realized something. Jason never talked about Emily becoming more herself. He always talked about improvement, upgrading, changing, growing, becoming better, as if the woman my daughter already was somehow wasn't enough. Driving home, I remembered Daniel saying almost identical things. You could be more. You could have more. You deserve better. And eventually, I had begun changing myself to fit his future. By the time I reached my house, the sun had already set. I walked into my quiet living room and looked at the family photographs on the shelves. Emily at age 10. Emily at high school graduation. Emily laughing beside her grandmother. Emily wearing the silver bracelet. I sat down slowly, because for the first time I understood that Jason wasn't taking things from my daughter. He wasn't forcing her. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't controlling her with anger. He was doing something much more dangerous. He was convincing her that becoming someone else was the same thing as becoming better. And years ago, another man had convinced me of exactly the same thing. 3 weeks after I visited the condo, Emily came to my house on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The weather had turned cold earlier than usual that year. Gray clouds hung over our neighborhood, and the maple trees in my front yard had already begun losing their leaves. I was baking banana bread when I heard her car pull into the driveway. Emily rushed inside carrying 2 large tote bags and an umbrella. "Mom, I only have about 20 minutes. I smiled. "That's longer than I've had lately." She gave me a guilty look. "I know. Work has been crazy." Work. Wedding planning. Jason. Everything in her life seemed to be moving faster than she could follow. She kissed my cheek and walked into the kitchen. "Something smells good." "Banana bread." "I haven't had your banana bread in years." For a few moments, she sounded like my daughter again. Not Jason's fiancée, not the successful marketing executive. Just Emily. She sat at the kitchen table while I poured coffee. "What brings you here?" "I need some old pictures." "What kind of pictures?" "For the wedding video." I smiled. "Those are upstairs." She stood. "I'll get them." As she walked toward the stairs, her phone rang. I heard Jason's name. She answered immediately. "Hi, babe." Her voice changed. It had become softer lately whenever she spoke to him. She walked onto the back porch to continue the conversation. I cleaned the dishes while she talked. Several minutes later, I noticed one of her tote bags had fallen onto the kitchen floor. Papers had slipped partially out of a large envelope. At first, I ignored them. Everyone deserves privacy. But then I noticed my own name. Margaret Butler. I bent down. The top page had partially unfolded. I only intended to place it back inside the envelope, nothing more. But the words caught my attention. Property asset verification. My heart immediately began beating faster. I shouldn't have looked. I know that, but mothers sometimes make terrible decisions when fear enters the room. I carefully lifted the first page. Several lines had been highlighted. Emily Butler, personal guarantee, shared liability, collateral. I felt cold. I turned another page. There was a mortgage estimate, a business loan application, and then I saw the address. My house. My hands started shaking. The document referenced future inheritance assets, assets expected to transfer, real property interest. I sat down slowly. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. The house I lived in had been paid off years ago. After my husband died, I had quietly updated my will. Everything would eventually belong to Emily. I never discussed it because there seemed no reason. Yet somehow, my daughter's future inheritance had become part of a financial agreement. I read another paragraph. If the business failed, certain assets could be pursued. Emily's signature line sat near the bottom. Unsigned. Thank God. Unsigned. Outside, I could still hear her speaking to Jason. I looked at the documents again. The wording was different. The numbers were different, but the feeling was identical. 35 years disappeared. Suddenly, I was 29 years old again. Daniel sitting beside me. Documents spread across our apartment table. Promises, dreams, temporary arrangements, simple signatures. Building our future. My chest tightened. I remembered the exact document I had signed. Daniel called it a routine guarantee, just paperwork, nothing to worry about. The business would succeed, everything would be temporary. I had trusted him, completely. The first signature became the second became the third. Eventually, I signed papers I barely understood because I believed love required trust. And now my daughter was standing outside my kitchen, talking to a man while nearly identical paperwork sat beside me. I heard the back door open. Quickly, I placed everything back into the envelope. Emily returned. Sorry, Jason's dealing with contractors. I forced myself to smile. Everything okay? She nodded. Just stressful. I watched her carefully. Did she know? Had she read everything? Was she scared? Or was she simply trusting him? She opened one of the cabinets. Where do you keep the old photo albums? Upstairs. She started toward the staircase again. I almost stopped her. Almost. The words reached my lips. Emily, don't sign those papers. But fear stopped me. Because I remembered the engagement dinner. I remembered her face. I remembered the words. Old-fashioned. If I confronted her now, would she listen? Or would she simply pull farther away? While she searched upstairs, I stood at the sink staring out the window. Rain slid down the glass. The backyard looked gray and empty. For the first time in years, I felt truly helpless. Parents spend decades protecting their children from dangers they can see. Sharp knives, busy roads, strangers, illness. But eventually the dangers become invisible. Charm, trust, promises, manipulation, and those are much harder to fight. Emily returned carrying several albums. She smiled. These are perfect. I nodded. She looked at me. You okay? Just tired. She sat down again. Mom. Yes. You've seemed worried lately. I hesitated. There it was. The opening. The opportunity. I could ask her about the papers. I could tell her what I had seen. I could explain. Instead, I asked, Are you happy? She smiled immediately. Of course. Really? Yes. I studied her face. There was happiness there, but there was also exhaustion and something else. Pressure. The kind I remembered carrying myself. The pressure to prove everyone wrong. The pressure to defend the man you love. The pressure to believe your future depends entirely on another person. She stood and gathered the albums. Jason and I are building something important. The sentence landed heavily inside me. Building something. Daniel had said exactly the same words. I walked her to the front door. The rain had stopped. Before leaving, she hugged me. I know you worry. I smiled. It's my job. She laughed softly. You don't have to worry so much. I wanted to tell her that mothers do not stop worrying when their children become adults. The worries simply become larger, more complicated, harder to solve. Instead, I kissed her forehead. Drive safely. After she left, I locked the front door and returned to the kitchen. The house felt very quiet. I sat at the table where the envelope had rested. The image of those documents would not leave my mind. Personal guarantee, shared liability, collateral, words that had once nearly destroyed my own life. I walked upstairs to my bedroom closet. In the very back sat a cardboard box. I had not opened it in almost 20 years. Inside were old tax returns, court records, letters, and documents from the worst years of my life. At the bottom of the box lay a faded contract. Daniel's handwriting appeared beside mine. My signature looked young, trusting, naive. My eyes filled with tears, because suddenly I understood something terrible. Emily was not simply dating the wrong man. She was approaching the exact moment that had changed my life forever. The moment before a signature. The moment before regret. And I no longer knew whether remaining silent would protect my daughter or destroy her. For almost a week after Emily visited my house, I carried the weight of those documents everywhere I went. I saw them while grocery shopping. I saw them while folding laundry. I saw them when I woke up in the middle of the night. Personal guarantee, shared liability, collateral. The words followed me like shadows. Several times I picked up the phone to call Emily. Several times I put it down. I had spent 34 years trying to be careful with my daughter's heart. When her father disappeared, I protected her. When money was tight, I protected her. When life became difficult, I protected her. Now I no longer knew if protecting her meant speaking or remaining silent. On Monday morning, I finally made a decision. I called Emily at work. "Would you have lunch with me?" There was a short pause. "Everything okay?" "Yes." "Is this about Jason?" "No." That was only partially true. She hesitated. "I have a meeting at 2. We can be quick." After several seconds, she agreed. We met at a small diner outside Worthington. The restaurant had been there for decades. The booths were worn, the coffee was strong, and the waitresses still called customers honey. Emily arrived 10 minutes late. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes. For the first time in months, she didn't seem completely confident. "Sorry," she said. "It's been crazy." I smiled. "I'm just glad you came." We ordered sandwiches. For a few minutes, we talked about harmless things: the weather, her job, the wedding invitations. But both of us knew why we were there. Finally, Emily folded her hands. "Mom." "Yes." "You've been upset ever since the engagement dinner." I looked down at my coffee. "I've been worried. About Jason. About you." She sighed. "They're the same thing to you." "No." She leaned back. "Then tell me what this is really about." I had rehearsed this conversation many times, but suddenly none of the words felt right. How do you tell your daughter that the man she loves reminds you of the worst years of your life? How do you explain fear without sounding bitter? How do you share old wounds without making them someone else's burden? I took a deep breath. "When I was younger, there was someone." She frowned slightly. "You mean Dad?" "No." The answer surprised her. "There was someone before Daniel." She looked confused. "You never told me that." "I never told anyone." The waitress refilled our coffee cups and walked away. I stared at the table. "He was charming." Emily remained silent. "He had dreams, business plans, opportunities." Her eyes slowly changed. "Mom." I believed every word. She looked uncomfortable. "I don't think this is about me." "I'm not saying it is." "Then why are we talking about this?" "Because I see him. Because every time Jason smiles, I remember. Because your future is beginning to look exactly like my past." But I couldn't say those words. Instead, I said, "Sometimes love makes us ignore things." Emily crossed her arms. "You don't know Jason." "I know certain behaviors." Her voice became sharper. "No, Mom, you know your past." The diner suddenly felt very quiet. I looked at her. She continued. "You had bad experiences." "Yes." "You trusted the wrong people." "Yes." "But that doesn't mean I am." I nodded slowly. "I understand." "No, you don't." Several people at nearby tables looked up. Emily lowered her voice. "You see danger everywhere." I felt my chest tighten. "I'm trying to help." "By comparing Jason to someone you dated 35 years ago." I said nothing, because in some ways she was right. The problem was that she didn't know how similar those years truly were. She didn't know about the contracts, the promises, the investments, the slow changes, the disappearing pieces of myself. She knew almost nothing, and that was my fault. I had spent years protecting her from my mistakes. Perhaps I had protected her too well. Emily looked down. "Jason thinks you hate him." The sentence hurt more than I expected. "I don't hate him. He feels judged." "I've asked questions." "You don't ask questions about anyone else." I hesitated. Then I said something I hadn't planned. "Have you read every page?" Her face immediately changed. "What?" "The documents." Silence. The color slowly disappeared from her face. "How do you know about those?" I took a breath. "They fell out of your bag." "You read them." I saw enough. She looked shocked. "You went through my things?" "No." "But you read them." "I was worried." She sat back in her chair. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. When she finally did, her voice had become cold. "You had no right." "I know." "No, you don't understand." People nearby had stopped talking. Emily lowered her voice again. "You violated my privacy." "I'm sorry." "You don't trust me." "I trust you." "Then why?" "Because I once signed papers exactly like yours. Because I nearly lost everything. Because I am terrified. But once again, I couldn't say all of it. I don't want you to take risks you don't understand." Her eyes filled with frustration. "You think Jason is manipulating me. I think you should be careful." She laughed quietly. There was no humor in it. "Careful." "Yes." "Mom, we're building a future." I heard Daniel's voice, almost word for word. She continued. "People support each other." "They should." "People invest together." "Sometimes." "People trust each other." I nodded. "They do." She stared directly at me. "You don't believe in any of that." The sadness inside me suddenly became very heavy. "I used to." Her expression softened slightly. "What happened?" There it was. The question. The opening. I could tell her everything. Daniel. The money. The signatures. The lies. The threats. I almost did. Instead, fear stopped me. What if she believed I was trying to manipulate her? What if she thought I was using my pain against Jason? I looked away. "I made mistakes," she sighed. "And now you think I'm making them too." "I think everyone can." Emily stood up. Her sandwich sat untouched. "I can't do this." "Emily." "No." She picked up her purse. "I love you, Mom." My eyes filled with tears. But sometimes I think you want me to be afraid because you're afraid. The words struck me harder than she knew, because perhaps there was some truth inside them. Fear had shaped much of my life. Fear of losing people, fear of trusting, fear of being wrong again. But there was another truth she couldn't see: experience, pain, memory. The bill arrived. She placed money on the table. I have to go. I reached for her hand. She allowed it. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I only want you to be safe. Her eyes softened. I know. No, Emily. My voice shook. You don't. She gently pulled her hand away. As she walked toward the door, she stopped. Without turning around, she said quietly, Jason says people sometimes become trapped in their past. The words hit me like cold water, because Daniel had once said something similar, and suddenly I realized something terrifying. Jason wasn't simply influencing my daughter. He was giving her explanations for me. He was teaching her how to interpret my concern. By the time the diner became quiet again, I was sitting alone. 2 untouched sandwiches, cold coffee, and a conversation that had gone exactly the way I feared. Outside, the sky had turned gray. I sat there for several minutes before driving home. That evening, I stood in my bedroom holding the old box of documents, court papers, bank statements, letters, evidence, proof. For 30 years, I had kept them hidden. To protect Emily, to preserve her image of her father, to prevent old wounds from reopening. But as I looked at those papers, I began asking myself a question I had never asked before. What if my silence had not protected my daughter? What if it had simply left her unprepared? And for the first time in many years, I wondered whether telling the truth might hurt her less than keeping it hidden. 2 days after my lunch with Emily, I called Helen Brooks. She answered on the second ring. Margaret, are you busy? There was a pause. How bad is it? I almost laughed. Helen had known me for 43 years. She could hear trouble in my breathing before I said a word. Can I come over? Of course. Helen lived 20 minutes away in a small brick house outside Westerville. Her husband had passed away several years earlier, and she spent most of her retirement reading mystery novels, volunteering at the library, and pretending she wasn't the smartest woman in every room. When I arrived, she already had coffee waiting. One look at my face, and she said, Something happened. I sat down slowly. I saw the documents. Her eyebrows lifted. What documents? I explained everything. Emily's visit, the papers, the future inheritance clause, the personal guarantee, the argument at the diner. Helen listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands. What exactly are you afraid of? The answer came immediately. I'm afraid she's becoming me. Helen was quiet. After several seconds, she asked, Have you ever told Emily everything? I looked down. No. Not even about Daniel. Not really? What does she know? Only that her father left. Helen sighed. Margaret. I know. No, I don't think you do. Her voice wasn't harsh. It was sad. For many years, Helen had watched me protect Emily from the truth. At the time, it had seemed noble. Maybe it still was. But now, I wasn't certain. I stared into my coffee. I didn't want her to hate him. Helen nodded. And I didn't want her childhood destroyed. And I swallowed. I didn't want her to know how foolish I was. That was the truth I rarely admitted. People talk about protecting children, but sometimes we also protect ourselves. For years, I had hidden Daniel's story because I couldn't bear seeing myself through my daughter's eyes. Helen leaned back. Margaret Emily grew up believing her father simply left. I nodded. She doesn't know the lies. No. She doesn't know the debts. No. She doesn't know the threats. I looked away. No. Helen sighed. Then how can she recognize a man like him? The question landed heavily between us, because suddenly the answer seemed obvious. She couldn't. How could she? I had spent 3 decades removing every warning sign from her life. After a few minutes, Helen stood. Come with me. She walked toward her home office. The room was filled with old legal books and filing cabinets from her years working for an attorney. She opened a drawer. Remember this? She handed me a yellow folder. My heart nearly stopped. Daniel Carter, written in black ink. I had forgotten Helen still had copies. Years earlier, during my divorce and financial troubles, she had helped organize my paperwork. I sat down. My hands trembled. Inside were court notices, debt statements, letters, photocopies. I hadn't seen some of them in decades. One paper immediately caught my eye. Daniel's signature, my signature, the guarantee agreement. I felt suddenly ill. Helen sat beside me. You remember what he said? I nodded. He said we were building our future. He said you were a team. Yes. He said successful couples invest together. I closed my eyes, because every sentence sounded familiar, almost identical. Helen continued quietly. He told you your mother didn't understand. Yes. He told you she lived in the past. Yes. I looked at her. Neither of us spoke, because we both knew why. After a long silence, Helen said something I wasn't prepared to hear. Have you ever looked into Jason? I frowned. What do you mean? She shrugged. People leave trails. Emily would hate that. Emily already hates your questions. The truth hurt. Helen walked to her computer. What's his company called? Mitchell Development Group. She typed. Several minutes passed. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Business registrations, property listings, real estate investments. Then Helen found something. A lawsuit. I leaned forward. Against Jason. Not exactly. She clicked another page. A business dispute. Several years earlier. A failed partnership. Money owed. The amount wasn't enormous, but it bothered me. There were 2 more. One involved a dissolved company. Another involved unpaid contractor fees. None of them proved anything. Businesses fail. People get sued. Life is complicated. Still, the feeling inside me grew stronger. Helen printed several pages. There's more. She found 3 separate companies connected to Jason over 8 years. 2 had closed. 1 had changed names. Again, nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, but enough to raise questions. I stared at the papers. Emily knows none of this. Does Jason talk about it? I don't know. Helen turned toward me. Then ask. I tried. Not Emily. I looked up. You mean Jason? She nodded. The idea made me uncomfortable, but perhaps she was right. I had never been alone with him, never asked direct questions, never seen him without Emily nearby. Helen sat down again. Margaret, may I say something difficult? I nodded. You keep trying to save Emily quietly. I frowned. What does that mean? You want her to discover the truth herself? Yes. Why? Because I didn't want to lose her, because I didn't want her anger, because I wanted to remain the good mother, because confrontation terrified me. Helen seemed to read my thoughts. Your mother warned you directly. I looked down. Yes. And you ignored her. I nodded. Would you rather she had stayed silent? My eyes filled unexpectedly. No. Why? Because she was right. Helen touched my hand. Then maybe your job isn't to convince Emily. I looked at her. Maybe your job is simply to tell the truth. The room became quiet. Outside, rain had begun falling. For several minutes, we sat without speaking. Then Helen reached for another folder. There's something else. I looked up. What? She opened several old papers. One page had names connected to one of Daniel's failed projects. Investors, developers, business contacts. Most meant nothing. Then one name caught my attention. Frank Mitchell. I frowned. Mitchell? Helen looked at me. Does Jason have family in Cincinnati? I think his father grew up there. We both became quiet. The name alone meant very little. Mitchell was common, very common. But suddenly, my stomach tightened. Because I remembered Jason mentioning his father once. Real estate, construction, investment projects. The same world Daniel had moved through decades earlier. The same kind of people. The same promises. I shook my head. No. Helen nodded. Probably nothing. Probably. Yet the word refused to comfort me. As evening approached, I gathered the printed papers, the lawsuits, the business records, the company filings. Nothing proved Jason was dangerous. Nothing proved he wasn't. At the front door, Helen hugged me. What are you going to do? I didn't know. Part of me wanted to confront Emily. Part of me wanted to confront Jason. Part of me wanted to tell the entire truth. As I drove home, darkness settled across the roads. The radio played softly. My mind replayed Helen's words. Maybe your job is simply to tell the truth. When I reached my driveway, I noticed something. A black SUV sat parked near my house. For a moment, my heart stopped. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Jason. He smiled. He was holding a bottle of wine, and for the first time since meeting him, my daughter's fiancé had come to see me alone. Jason Mitchell was standing beside his black SUV holding a bottle of red wine. For a moment, neither of us moved. The porch light cast long shadows across the driveway, and the autumn air had become cold enough that I could see my breath. He smiled. Margaret. I tried to hide my surprise. Jason. He lifted the bottle slightly. I hope this isn't a bad time. Every instinct inside me said yes, but another part of me, the part that had spent weeks wondering who Jason really was, told me not to send him away. No, I said quietly. Come inside. He followed me into the kitchen. I noticed immediately how comfortable he seemed. No nervousness, no hesitation. He removed his coat and carefully placed the wine on the table. It's one of Emily's favorites. I nodded. Coffee. That would be nice. As I prepared the coffee, he looked around the kitchen. The old photographs, the worn cabinets, the grandfather clock visible from the hallway. For a moment, he reminded me of a real estate investor studying a property. Perhaps that wasn't fair. Perhaps I was imagining things. But the feeling remained. We sat at the kitchen table. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he smiled. I think Emily's worried about you. That surprised me. About me? He nodded. She says you've seemed upset lately. I stirred my coffee. I've been thinking about us. The word us. Interesting. Not him. Not Emily. Us. I looked at him. Partly. He nodded. I appreciate your honesty. His voice was calm, controlled, professional. For several minutes he talked about the wedding, the venue, the flowers, the guest list. It all sounded perfectly normal, almost pleasant. Then he leaned back slightly. I know you don't trust me. The words hung between us. I met his eyes. I don't know you well. He smiled. Fair enough. I waited. He continued. I think Emily feels caught in the middle. There it was. Not an accusation. Not yet. A concern. A reasonable observation. Very carefully delivered. I took a sip of coffee. Emily is an adult. She is. She makes her own decisions. Absolutely. Again, the answers sounded perfect. Almost too perfect. He folded his hands. She loves you very much. I know. And she wants your blessing. I looked down. I want her happiness. He smiled softly. Then perhaps we want the same thing. Maybe we did. Or maybe he simply knew exactly how to sound reasonable. The conversation moved slowly. He spoke about growing up in Indiana, his father's construction business, his first investment, the years building his company. I listened carefully, looking for cracks, looking for something, anything. But Jason was very good at talking. He answered questions without truly giving answers. He provided details while revealing very little. Finally, I asked directly. I heard your company had some legal disputes. His expression barely changed. Only barely. Every business does. There were several. He nodded. Construction is complicated. He took another sip of coffee. Contractors sue. Investors argue. Projects fail. He smiled. If you stay in business long enough, someone eventually sues you. It was not an unreasonable answer, but it wasn't a complete one either. I studied him. Did you lose money? Yes. Did other people lose money? He nodded. Unfortunately. The kitchen grew quiet. Outside, the wind rattled the trees. Then he asked something unexpected. Has Emily told you about our plans? The property. He smiled. It's exciting. I kept my voice neutral. She's making a large commitment. He looked directly at me. So am I. There was something different in his eyes now. Not anger, not warmth, something sharper. I would never hurt her. The words sounded sincere. Yet suddenly, I remembered Daniel saying exactly the same thing. I decided to ask one more question. Why does she need to guarantee the loans? For the first time, Jason looked away, only briefly. Because we're partners. Business partners. Life partners. He smiled again. Successful couples build together. There it was, the same sentence, almost word for word. My hands became cold. He noticed. Margaret. I looked up. I've heard that before. His expression changed slightly. From whom? I hesitated. Someone a long time ago. He studied me. For the first time all evening, neither of us spoke. Then Jason leaned forward. I know you've had difficult experiences. My heart skipped. What do you mean? His voice remained calm. Emily told me a little. A little? He nodded. About her father. I felt uncomfortable. She doesn't know very much. No? He looked down at his coffee. She said you don't like talking about it. The room suddenly felt smaller. How much had Emily shared? How much had Jason asked? He continued quietly. Sometimes people get trapped by old pain. The exact words Emily had spoken at the diner. Suddenly, I realized they had come from him. He had given her the language, the explanation, the interpretation. He looked directly at me. I think you're afraid she'll repeat your mistakes. I felt my pulse quicken. What makes you say that? He smiled gently. Because you keep comparing me to someone else. I said nothing. Because he was right. Partly, but not entirely. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. I know Daniel Carter wasn't a good man. The air left my lungs. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. How do you know that name? Jason remained calm. Emily mentioned it. No, I shook my head. She doesn't know much about him. He paused. My father knew him. The room became silent. What? My father worked around Cincinnati years ago. He shrugged. Construction business. I stared at him. Your father knew Daniel. A little. How little? He leaned back. I'm not sure. My mind immediately returned to Helen's office. Frank Mitchell, construction, Cincinnati, old business connections. The coincidence suddenly felt much smaller. Jason noticed my expression. I don't think they were close. Have you talked about him before? Only once. With your father? He nodded. He said Daniel was reckless. Reckless. That word felt painfully inadequate. Daniel had destroyed my life. But Jason continued. My father said people made mistakes. The sentence sounded strangely deliberate, as if he wanted me to hear something else. People make mistakes. People deserve second chances. People live in the past. The pattern was beginning to appear. He stood up. I should go. I remained seated. He picked up his coat. At the door he stopped. I love Emily. I know. And she trusts me. There it was. Not anger, not pleading, trust. The same word Daniel had used. The same word that had once convinced me to sign papers. The same word that now stood between me and my daughter. Jason opened the door. Cold air entered the house. Then he turned back. I hope someday you'll give me a chance. His voice remained pleasant. His smile remained warm. But something inside me had changed. Because for the first time all evening, I had stopped listening to his words. I had started listening to what lay underneath them. He knew more about Daniel than he should. He had given Emily explanations for my behavior. He had slowly positioned my concerns as fear. And somehow, without ever raising his voice, he had tried to convince me that I was the problem. After he left, I locked the door. The house felt strangely quiet. I sat alone in the kitchen for nearly an hour. My coffee had grown cold. The clock ticked in the hallway, and one thought kept returning. Jason never threatened me. He never became angry. He never lost control. But somehow I felt more unsettled than if he had shouted. Because Daniel had once done exactly the same thing. The charm, the patience, the reasonableness, the ability to make other people question themselves. And as I sat there in the silence, I realized something terrifying. Jason wasn't afraid of me. He believed he had already won, because Emily trusted him. And years ago, I had trusted Daniel exactly the same way. For nearly a week after Jason visited my house, Emily did not call. I told myself she was busy. Wedding plans, work deadlines, the endless details that come before a marriage. But deep down, I knew something had changed. Jason had come to see me for a reason. He had been polite, careful, reasonable. Yet somehow, I felt as though the conversation had not truly happened inside my kitchen. It had happened somewhere beneath the surface where neither of us had spoken directly. And I could not stop thinking about one thing. He knew Daniel Carter's name. I had never told him. Emily barely knew anything. So how had he known enough to mention him? The following Saturday, I finally called my daughter. She answered after several rings. "Hi, Mom." Her voice sounded distant. "How are you?" "I'm okay." The silence that followed felt enormous. "Would you like to have dinner?" Another pause. "I don't think that's a good idea." The answer hurt more than I expected. "Emily, Mom, I really don't want to fight." "I don't either." She sighed softly. "I've had a difficult week." "So have I." She was quiet. Then she said something that made my heart sink. "Jason told me about your conversation." Of course he had. "What exactly did he tell you?" "That you asked about his finances." "I did." "That you asked about lawsuits." "Yes." "That you questioned our relationship." I closed my eyes. I asked questions. "He feels like you're investigating him." I wanted to say that perhaps I was, but I knew those words would only make things worse. "I'm trying to understand." "Why?" "Because I am afraid. Because I recognize something. Because I once stood exactly where you are standing now." But none of those answers seemed strong enough. Emily spoke again. "You don't trust him." "I don't know him." "You don't want to know him." "That's not true." "Then why does every conversation become a warning?" Her voice was beginning to shake. I recognized the emotion immediately. Defensiveness. The same emotion I once felt whenever my mother questioned Daniel. Because when someone questions the person you love, it feels as though they are questioning your judgment, your intelligence, your future, your heart. And people protect those things fiercely. "Emily, please listen." "I have listened." "No." My voice became softer. "You've listened to my concerns, but you haven't heard them." She exhaled slowly. "Mom, Jason loves me." "I know." "He supports me." "I understand." "He believes in me." I swallowed. So did Daniel. The line became silent. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. When Emily answered, her voice had changed. "You keep doing that." "Doing what?" "Comparing him." "I'm comparing situations." "No." She sounded angry now. "You're comparing my life to yours." I sat down in my kitchen chair. Outside, leaves were blowing across the yard. "You think because you made mistakes, I'll make them too?" "I think people sometimes repeat patterns." "I'm not you." "No." "I'm not 29 years old." "I know." "I'm not some naive woman." "I never said you were." She took a deep breath. "Jason says you're afraid because your life didn't turn out the way you wanted." The words struck me like a slap. Not because they were completely false, but because they were cruel. and because they did not sound like Emily. I spoke carefully. Do you believe that? She hesitated. I think you're lonely. I closed my eyes. Lonely. Another explanation. Another interpretation. Another reason to dismiss my concerns. Emily. What? I have spent my entire life trying to protect you. I don't need protection. Everyone does sometimes. No. Her voice became firm. I'm 34 years old. I know. I make my own decisions. Yes. Then why can't you accept them? Because some decisions change your entire life. Because some signatures cannot be taken back. Because trust can become debt. Because love can become obligation. But she wasn't ready to hear those things. Perhaps I wasn't ready to say them. She continued quietly. Jason thinks you blame yourself for what happened with Dad. I felt my chest tighten. He said that he thinks you never forgave yourself. There it was again. The ability to explain me to my own daughter. The ability to become the interpreter, the translator, the reasonable voice. I suddenly understood why I felt so uneasy. Jason wasn't arguing against me. He was redefining me. Every fear became trauma. Every question became bitterness. Every concern became regret. And if Emily accepted that version of me, then nothing I said would ever matter. I stood and walked toward the window. I met with Helen. Emily sighed. Of course you did. We found information about some of Jason's businesses. Her voice became cold. You investigated him. I looked at public records. Mom, there were lawsuits. Businesses get sued. There were multiple companies. People have companies. I closed my eyes. We should talk about this together. No. The answer came immediately. No. I don't want to discuss Jason with you anymore. My heart sank. Emily. I'm serious. Why? Because every conversation ends the same way. I leaned against the kitchen counter. I only want you to be careful. I know. No, you don't. She became quiet. Then she said something I had feared for weeks. If you can't support us, maybe we need some distance. The room suddenly felt very small. What does that mean? It means I need peace. I could hear tears in her voice, and somehow that hurt even more. Because she believed she was protecting herself from me, the same way I once protected myself from my mother. I whispered, "You're choosing him." She was silent. Then, "I'm choosing my life." The words sounded almost identical to words I had spoken decades earlier. My mother had cried when I said them. Now I finally understood why. Because children believe they are choosing one person. But parents hear something different. They hear, "I no longer trust you. I no longer need you. I no longer believe you." Emily spoke again. I think we should take a break for a while. I couldn't speak. Mom. Yes. I love you. The tears finally came. I love you too. But I need you to stop trying to save me. Save me. The word echoed inside me, because she still didn't understand. I wasn't trying to save her from Jason. I was trying to save her from becoming me. After the call ended, I sat alone in my kitchen. The house was completely silent. For the first time in my daughter's life, she had chosen to step away from me. Not because she hated me, not because she didn't love me, but because another voice had become louder than mine. That evening, I opened the old box again. The documents, the letters, the court papers, the truth. For 35 years, I had kept them hidden. For 35 years, I believed silence was kindness. But now, my daughter had walked away believing I was simply afraid. Perhaps it was finally time for her to know exactly what had happened. Because if I stayed silent any longer, I might lose her completely. And this time, I wasn't sure love alone would bring her back. After Emily asked for distance, the house became unbearably quiet. For several days, I moved through my routines as if someone else were living my life. I watered my plants, I attended church, I bought groceries. I answered Helen's phone calls. But everything felt distant. My daughter had chosen another voice over mine, and perhaps the most painful part was that I understood why. Because I had once done exactly the same thing. On Wednesday evening, I carried the old cardboard box into my living room. For 35 years, it had remained hidden in the back of my closet. Inside were documents I had sworn Emily would never see. Not because they were dangerous, because they were humiliating. The first envelope contained overdue notices. The second contained legal papers. The third held photographs. At the very bottom lay several letters written by Daniel Carter. I sat on the floor and began reading. The first letter had been written shortly after our engagement. He called me his partner, his future, his greatest blessing. He promised that one day we would laugh about our financial struggles. He promised our sacrifices would be temporary. He promised he would take care of me forever. I remembered believing every word. The second letter came later. The handwriting had changed. The warmth had disappeared. He spoke about debts, business pressures, investments, responsibilities. He reminded me that love meant standing beside each other. He reminded me that I had promised to trust him. Trust. Always that word. The final letter was the one I hated most. It arrived after he left. 3 short paragraphs. No apology. No explanation. Only excuses. Business failures. Bad timing. Circumstances. He wrote that someday I would understand. I never did. The front doorbell rang. It was Helen. She entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. "How are you holding up?" I laughed softly. "Poorly." She sat beside me on the floor. For several minutes we looked through the papers together. Finally she said, "You have to tell her." I stared at an old photograph, Emily at age 5, Daniel standing beside her. She barely remembered him. Most of her memories came from stories I had created. Your father traveled? Your father had problems. Your father couldn't stay. I had softened everything. I had protected him, protected myself, protected her. And perhaps in doing so, I had protected the wrong person. Helen looked at me carefully. "What are you afraid of?" I answered honestly. "That she'll hate him." "He's gone." "That she'll hate me." Helen took my hand. "Margaret, your daughter believes you were simply unlucky." I nodded. "She doesn't know what you survived." The truth was difficult, very difficult. Daniel had not simply left. First he lost our savings. Then he borrowed against credit cards. Then he convinced me to sign guarantees. When creditors began calling, he promised to fix everything. When lawsuits arrived, he promised to solve them. When collectors appeared at our door, he disappeared. He left while I was pregnant. For several months, I heard almost nothing. Then he returned, not to help, to ask for money. The memory still made me sick. Emily was 6 months old. I was exhausted. I was working 2 jobs. Daniel sat in my kitchen asking for another loan. He said one investment would solve everything. I finally said no. He became angry. Very angry. That was the first time I truly saw him. Not the charming man, not the dreamer, not the businessman. A man who believed everyone else existed to support him. When I refused, he threatened legal action. He said some debts were still connected to my name. He said I owed him loyalty. He said I had ruined his life. For years I blamed myself. Maybe I had. Maybe I hadn't. Eventually he disappeared completely. No child support, no letters, no birthdays, nothing. Emily grew up believing her father had simply left because he couldn't handle responsibility. She never knew how close we came to losing everything. She never knew I worked evenings cleaning offices. She never knew I sold my grandmother's jewelry. She never knew I cried in my car before going inside our apartment because I didn't want her to see. I wanted her childhood to feel safe. So I built safety. One lie at a time. Helen quietly said, "You survived." I nodded. "Barely." "You built a life?" "Yes." "You raised Emily." I looked at her. "And now she thinks I'm simply afraid." Helen smiled sadly. "Because she only knows half the story." After she left, I remained alone with the box. Around midnight, I carried everything to the dining room table. I organized the papers, court documents, bank records, letters, photographs. One picture stopped me. I was 29, standing beside Daniel, smiling, completely certain. The expression looked painfully familiar. It was the same expression I had seen on Emily's face beside Jason. I suddenly understood why I had been unable to explain myself. I had spent years hiding my shame. But perhaps shame was exactly what my daughter needed to understand. Not because I wanted her to feel sorry for me, because mistakes become warnings. And warnings only work when people know the truth. The next morning I called Emily. She didn't answer. I left a message. "Emily, I need to tell you something about your father." No response. I sent a text. "Please let me explain." Hours passed. Nothing. Late that evening, my phone finally rang. Her voice sounded cautious. "What is this about?" I took a deep breath. "It's about Daniel." She was silent. "You never talk about him." "I know." "Why now?" "Because another man has entered your life. Because I waited too long. Because I made a terrible mistake." I said quietly, "Because I should have told you years ago." She hesitated. "Is something wrong?" "Yes." "What?" "The story you know isn't the truth." Long silence. "What do you mean?" I looked at the papers spread across my dining table. 35 years of silence. 35 years of shame. 35 years of protection. I realized there was no way to tell this story over the telephone. "Please come see me." "Mom, please." Her breathing became slower. "I don't know." "Emily, there are things you deserve to know." "About Dad?" "Yes." Another silence, then, "Jason doesn't think this is a good idea." My eyes closed. Of course, even now, even here, another voice, another opinion, another interpretation. I spoke very gently. "This conversation is only between you and me." She did not answer immediately. Finally, she said, "I'll think about it." The call ended. I remained seated at the table. The old papers surrounded me. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. For the first time in many years, the secrets no longer felt heavy because of what they contained. They felt heavy because I had carried them alone, and now my daughter stood at a crossroads. She could continue believing I was simply a frightened woman trapped by old mistakes. Or she could finally learn exactly what those mistakes had cost. Because sometimes the only way to save someone you love is to let them see the scars you spent years trying to hide. 3 days passed after my conversation with Emily. 3 days of silence. No calls, no messages, no answers. I tried to keep busy. I attended church on Sunday. I had lunch with Helen. I cleaned closets that did not need cleaning, but every room in my house felt as if it were waiting for something. Or someone. The box of old documents remained on my dining room table. I no longer hid it. For the first time in decades, my past sat openly in the center of my home. On Monday afternoon, I was folding laundry when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I almost ignored it. Almost. Hello! For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then a woman's voice answered. Is this Margaret Butler? Yes. My name is Rebecca Collins. I frowned. I'm sorry. I don't think we know each other. There was another pause. No? Her voice sounded nervous. But I know Jason Mitchell. Every muscle in my body tightened. I sat down immediately. How do you know him? She took a deep breath. I was engaged to him. The room became completely silent. Outside, a lawnmower hummed somewhere down the street. Inside my kitchen, even the clock seemed to stop. When, 4 years ago, I could barely speak. Why are you calling me? I saw Emily's engagement photos online. My hands began to shake. We have mutual friends. I swallowed, and I recognized him immediately. I stood and walked toward the window. What do you want from me? The woman hesitated. I don't know. Her voice broke slightly. Maybe I want to stop someone else from making my mistake. The sentence sent chills through me because it was exactly why I had spent weeks trying to reach my daughter. I sat down again. Tell me. For the next 40 minutes, Rebecca Collins told me a story that felt frighteningly familiar. She met Jason at a business conference. He was charming, successful, attentive. He remembered small details. He made her feel important. He talked about partnership, building a future, growing together. The same words, always the same words. Rebecca was a financial consultant in Chicago. She had savings, investments, good credit. Jason talked about expanding his company. He said opportunities required teamwork. He said couples should build wealth together. He said trust mattered more than money. My chest tightened. Because I knew these conversations, I had lived them. Rebecca continued. He never demanded anything. What do you mean? He made everything feel like my idea. I closed my eyes. Daniel had done exactly the same thing. The dangerous men never force. They persuade. They encourage. They praise. Until your own decisions no longer feel entirely your own. What happened? There was a long silence. I signed loan documents. My heart sank. How much? $120,000. I gripped the phone tighter. He said the project would pay it back. And the project failed. My voice became very quiet. Did he leave? Not immediately. She laughed softly. The sound carried no humor. He stayed long enough to explain why everything wasn't his fault. I looked toward the old box on the table. Daniel, Jason, different decades, different men, the same story. Rebecca continued. He always had explanations. Like what? The market, the economy, partners, bad luck. She paused. And eventually, Me. I knew exactly what she meant. At some point, the failure becomes yours. You didn't believe enough. You didn't support enough. You didn't trust enough. I asked carefully, did he ever become violent? No. The answer surprised me. He was never violent. She took a breath. That's what makes it difficult to explain. I understood immediately, because people expect monsters to look dangerous. They expect shouting, anger, cruelty. But some people damage others quietly, through guilt, through persuasion, through love. Rebecca continued. I finally left. What happened? He told everyone I was afraid of commitment. My stomach tightened. He said I had trust issues. There it was. The language. The explanations. The same things Emily now believed about me. Rebecca spoke softly. I lost money. How much? Almost everything. The room became silent. Finally, I asked, why are you calling now? She hesitated. Because I saw your daughter. My eyes filled. And she looked exactly like I looked. The tears came unexpectedly. Because another woman had seen it too. I wasn't imagining everything. I wasn't trapped entirely in my past. Some patterns truly existed. Rebecca spoke again. I still have things. What things? Emails, contracts, messages. My breathing stopped. Why did you keep them? She laughed quietly. The same reason you probably kept yours. I looked toward the dining table. Because pain leaves evidence. Because we keep proof that what happened was real. Because someday, someone may need to see it. Rebecca asked carefully, does Emily know? No. Will she listen? I don't know. Will Jason be at the bridal shower? I frowned. Yes. She became quiet. Then she said something that changed everything. I can send you everything. For several seconds, I could not speak. What? The contracts. The messages. The emails. The financial documents. My heart pounded, because suddenly this was no longer simply my past. This was not Daniel. Not memory. Not fear. This was another woman. Another story. Another warning. I asked quietly, why help me? Her voice broke. Because nobody helped me. After we ended the call, I sat alone for a long time. The house felt different, not lighter, but clearer. I was not simply a mother trapped by old wounds. Another woman had walked the same road. Another woman had heard the same promises. Another woman had lost money to the same kind of dream. An hour later, my computer chimed. Rebecca's email, several attachments, contracts, loan agreements, emails, text messages, photographs. I opened one document. My blood ran cold. The language was nearly identical to Emily's paperwork. Personal guarantee, shared responsibility, future growth, partnership, trust. I printed everything. Page after page covered my dining table. Rebecca's story beside my own. 2 generations. 2 women. The same lessons. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. Emily's bridal shower was only 6 days away. Family, friends, Jason's parents, her co-workers. Everyone would be there. And if Emily still intended to sign the final documents, time was running out. That evening, Helen came over. I showed her everything. She read quietly. When she finished, she looked at me. "What are you going to do?" I stared at the papers, at Daniel's documents, at Rebecca's documents, at 35 years of silence, at 4 years of another woman's pain. And finally, I said the words I had been avoiding. "I'm going to tell her everything." Helen nodded. "And if she doesn't believe you?" I looked down at the evidence spread across the table. Then I answered, honestly. "At least this time, I won't stay silent." The bridal shower was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. For 6 days, I barely slept. Rebecca's documents remained spread across my dining room table beside my own. Sometimes I would sit for hours comparing the pages. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Shared investments, personal guarantees, future opportunities, trust. The same language, the same promises, the same risks. Several times I considered canceling. Several times I convinced myself to remain silent. But every time I imagined Emily signing those documents, I saw myself sitting at a kitchen table 35 years earlier. And I remembered my mother. She had warned me. She had spoken. She had risked losing me. She had loved me enough to become the villain. Perhaps that was what motherhood sometimes required. The bridal shower took place at a country club outside Columbus. Emily's friends had decorated the room with flowers, white candles, and photographs from her childhood. Many of those photographs came from my house. Emily at 6 years old. Emily graduating high school. Emily laughing beside me on a beach in South Carolina. Seeing those pictures nearly broke my heart. Because for the past several weeks, my daughter had felt farther away than ever. When I arrived, several women greeted me warmly. Jason's mother, Patricia, hugged me. "I'm so glad you came." I smiled politely. "So am I." Emily stood near the center of the room. She wore a pale blue dress. For a moment, she looked exactly like the little girl I had raised. Then she saw me. Her smile faded slightly. Not anger, not resentment, just uncertainty. We hugged. She whispered, "Thank you for coming." Of course. For the next hour, everything appeared normal. People laughed. They played games. They opened gifts. Emily smiled for photographs. Jason arrived briefly carrying flowers. Everyone loved him. Everyone. He kissed Emily. He complimented the decorations. He thanked the guests. He spoke to me politely. If someone had entered the room without knowing our story, they would have seen a perfect couple. Perhaps that was why these situations become so difficult. Danger rarely announces itself. It often arrives wearing a beautiful suit and carrying flowers. As the afternoon continued, I noticed something. Emily looked exhausted. She smiled constantly, but her eyes seemed tired. Several times, she checked her phone. Several times, Jason stepped aside to answer business calls. At one point, I overheard him speaking quietly outside. "The paperwork needs to happen next week." My heart tightened. Next week? After the wedding? The timing was becoming very real. Near the end of the party, Emily's friend Lauren stood. "I think Margaret should say a few words." Several women applauded. My stomach immediately dropped. "No." Emily smiled politely. "You don't have to." But the room had already become quiet. Everyone turned toward me. Jason smiled. His parents smiled. Emily looked uncertain. I stood slowly. For several seconds, I could not speak. The room blurred slightly. I saw my daughter, the gifts, the decorations, the photographs. And suddenly, I realized this might be my last chance, not to stop the wedding, to tell the truth. I took a breath. When Emily was 6 years old, she asked me why her father left. The room became quiet. Emily looked surprised. I had never discussed Daniel publicly. Never. I continued. I told her he couldn't stay. My voice trembled. That wasn't the whole truth. Emily stared at me. Mom. No. My eyes filled. I need to say this. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I looked directly at my daughter. Your father didn't simply leave. Emily looked confused. What are you talking about? I swallowed. He lost our savings. The room remained silent. He asked me to sign documents. Jason became very still. He promised me opportunities. My hands trembled. He told me we were building a future. Emily's face slowly changed. Mom? He said successful couples invest together. Nobody in the room moved. I continued. I trusted him. The tears came. I trusted him because I loved him. Emily looked frightened now. Mom, please. He left debts. He left lawsuits. He left us. I could barely breathe. And I spent 30 years hiding that truth because I didn't want you to hate him. The room was completely silent. I looked directly at my daughter. I wasn't afraid because I failed. My voice shook. I was afraid because I survived. Emily stared at me. For the first time in weeks, she looked not angry, but confused. Jason stood. Margaret, maybe this isn't the time. I turned toward him. No. My voice became stronger. It is exactly the time. The room grew tense. Emily looked between us. What is happening? I reached into my purse. Several envelopes sat inside. Rebecca's documents, my documents, evidence, truth. I placed them on the table. There was another woman. Jason froze, only for a moment, but I saw it. Everyone saw it. His face changed. Emily looked confused. What? I looked at my daughter. Her name is Rebecca Collins. Jason spoke immediately. Margaret. No. I opened one envelope. She was engaged to Jason. Emily turned toward him. His face remained calm. Almost. That was years ago. I looked at him. She signed documents, too. The room seemed to stop breathing. Emily whispered, Jason? He took a step toward her. She's upset. I pulled out several papers. She lost her savings. Jason's voice became firmer. This is inappropriate. I looked directly at him. Did she sign guarantees? He said nothing. Emily looked at him. Jason? He took a breath. It was a failed investment. Did she lose money? His silence answered. Emily's face became pale. I continued quietly. Jason, did you tell Rebecca she had trust issues? His eyes met mine. No answer. Did you tell her she was afraid? Still nothing. The room felt frozen. Emily stepped backward. Is this true? Jason finally spoke. It isn't that simple. I almost cried, because Daniel had said those exact words. It isn't that simple. Emily looked at him. Why didn't you tell me? He moved closer. I was going to. When? No answer. The silence became unbearable. For the first time since meeting him, Jason looked uncertain. Not angry, not charming, not confident, simply uncertain. Emily looked at me. Tears filled her eyes. Why didn't you tell me all this before? The question broke my heart, because she was right. I should have. Years ago. Long before Jason. Long before today. Long before another woman had to call me. I whispered, because I was ashamed. Emily cried. So, was I supposed to figure this out alone? The answer was no. Of course it was. And suddenly I understood something. This moment wasn't only about Jason. It wasn't only about trust. It was about 35 years of silence between a mother and daughter. And finally, for the first time in their lives, neither of us was hiding anymore. For several seconds after my question, nobody in the room moved. The bridal shower had become so quiet that I could hear the air conditioner humming somewhere above us. Emily stood between Jason and me. One hand rested against the edge of the table. The other still held the corner of Rebecca's documents. Her face had lost all color. Jason was the first to speak. Emily, this isn't the way to do this. His voice was calm, controlled, reasonable. Anyone watching from outside would have believed he was the victim. I knew that voice. Daniel had used it. The voice that says everyone else is emotional while you remain rational. The voice that quietly places blame without raising volume. Emily looked at him. Did you know Rebecca called my mother? Jason exhaled. Yes. Her eyes widened. You knew? I assumed she might. Why didn't you tell me? He stepped closer. Because it ended years ago. Emily looked down at the documents. You were engaged. Yes. You never told me. I didn't think it mattered. The room remained silent. Jason's mother looked confused. Several of Emily's friends avoided eye contact. Nobody knew what to say. Emily slowly lifted another page. She guaranteed a loan. Jason nodded. Yes. And she lost money. It was a failed investment. The same answer, over and over. The project failed. The investment failed. The market failed. Everyone failed except the man making the promises. Emily looked at him again. Did you ask her to sign? He hesitated. She wanted to help. Those words made my heart sink, because I remembered Daniel saying exactly the same thing. Margaret wanted to help. Nobody forced her. She chose it. Dangerous men often leave fingerprints nowhere except inside your own doubts. Emily looked toward me. Her eyes were full of confusion. You knew... I nodded slowly. I knew enough. She swallowed. And you thought this would happen to me? I looked at her. No. My voice shook. I was afraid it might. She sat down. The room still had not recovered. Nobody touched the food. Nobody spoke. For the first time since the engagement dinner, Emily looked frightened. Not of Jason, not of me, of herself. Because perhaps she was beginning to understand something terrible. Intelligent women can make devastating mistakes. Love does not protect us from bad decisions. Sometimes it encourages them. Jason knelt beside her chair. Emily. She looked at him. I love you. She said nothing. We've talked about all of this. No. Her voice was very quiet. We didn't. His expression changed slightly. Emily. You never told me. I didn't want to burden you. I almost closed my eyes. The same words. Always the same words. I protected you. I didn't want to worry you. I didn't want to burden you. Every omission becomes kindness. Every secret becomes protection. I had done it myself for 30 years. Emily looked down at Rebecca's emails. Several messages had been highlighted. One sentence seemed to catch her attention. She read it twice. Then she looked at Jason. Did you tell her she had trust issues? Jason became very still. He didn't answer. She looked again. Did you tell her she was afraid of commitment? Silence. Emily slowly raised her eyes. Did you? His voice remained calm. We had problems. She looked at me, then back at him. And you told me my mother was trapped in her past. Jason exhaled. Emily, you told me she was afraid. His jaw tightened. The room seemed to shrink. For the first time since I had known him, Jason looked uncomfortable. Not because of the accusations, because he was losing control of the conversation. Emily stood. I need some air. Jason reached toward her. She stepped back. The movement was small, but everyone noticed. The room became even quieter. Emily walked outside onto the terrace. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Jason turned toward me. His expression changed. Very slightly, but enough. The warmth disappeared. The patience disappeared. Only for a moment, and suddenly I saw him. Not the charming man, not the polished businessman, a man who had lost control. His voice became lower. Was this necessary? I looked at him. Yes. He shook his head. You've embarrassed your daughter. The words hurt, because they were true, but another truth existed too. I had also tried to save her. Jason leaned closer. This could have been private. I met his eyes. So could Rebecca's story. For the first time, anger flashed across his face. Only briefly, but I saw it. Helen would have seen it. Rebecca would have seen it. Emily perhaps had begun seeing it. He looked away. Several guests quietly moved toward another side of the room. Jason's father sat silently. His mother appeared shocked. Nobody seemed to know which version of him was real. After several minutes, Emily returned. Her eyes were red. She carried my old photograph. The one of Daniel and me. I hadn't realized she had taken it from the table. She looked at me. When was this 1989? She studied my face. You look happy. I smiled sadly. I was. She looked at Daniel. He looks. She stopped, because she had finally seen it. Not the appearance, not the face, the confidence, the certainty, the smile, the belief that the future already belonged to him. She looked toward Jason, then back to the photograph, and suddenly tears filled her eyes. My God! Nobody spoke. She looked at me. This was you. I nodded. She whispered, This is me. The words nearly broke me, because finally she understood. Not that Jason and Daniel were identical. Not that history always repeats itself. But that human beings repeat patterns, promises, excuses, silences, trust. She walked slowly toward Jason. Her hands trembled. Why didn't you tell me about Rebecca? Jason spoke carefully. It wasn't important. It was to me. I didn't want to lose you. She looked down. You didn't trust me enough to tell me. His voice hardened slightly. This is exactly why I didn't. Emily looked up. What does that mean? He sighed. Your mother has spent weeks trying to poison you against me. The room became silent. There it was. Finally. Not fear, not concern. Blame. Emily stared at him. My mother, she's bitter. I felt the air leave my lungs. Jason continued. She's spent her entire life trapped by one bad relationship. No one moved. No one breathed. And now she's trying to make everyone else live in her past. His voice had become colder, harder. The mask had finally cracked. Emily looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. Because he had just insulted the woman who raised her. The woman who worked 2 jobs. The woman who spent 30 years protecting her. He took another step. "Emily, you know I'm right." She whispered, "No." He frowned. She looked directly at him. "My mother was trying to protect me." The words trembled, but they were there. Jason looked shocked. For the first time all afternoon, he had no answer. Emily slowly removed her engagement ring. The room froze. Tears ran down her face. She held the ring in her hand. Jason stared at her. "Emily." She looked at him and quietly said, "I don't know who you are anymore." Nobody moved after Emily removed her engagement ring. The room remained silent. Jason stared at the ring in her hand, as if he could not quite understand what had happened. "Emily," he said quietly. She looked at him. Her eyes were filled with tears, but something else had appeared there too. Clarity. Not complete certainty, not complete understanding, but clarity. The kind that arrives when a person suddenly sees 2 versions of reality and realizes they cannot both be true. She slowly placed the ring on the gift table. "I need time." Jason took a step toward her. "We can talk." She shook her head. "No." "Emily." I said no. For the first time since I had known him, Jason's face hardened. Only for a second. Only enough. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. Then the expression disappeared. But Emily saw it. I know she did, because I saw her shoulders stiffen. The women around the room remained quiet. Several guests quietly gathered their purses. Someone began stacking empty plates. Nobody knew how to behave when a perfect engagement collapsed in front of them. Jason looked toward me. The anger in his eyes lasted only a moment. Then the charming version of him returned. "I think everyone is upset." Emily spoke. "No." He looked at her. "I'm not upset." She wiped her eyes. "I'm finally paying attention." The sentence struck all of us. Jason looked down. Then he picked up his jacket. "If you want to talk later, call me." Emily said nothing. He walked toward the door. His parents followed him. His mother stopped beside Emily. She looked devastated. "I'm sorry." Emily nodded. When the doors finally closed behind them, the room seemed to exhale. Several people quietly hugged Emily. Others left. Within 30 minutes, the beautiful bridal shower had become an empty room, filled with unopened gifts and broken expectations. I sat beside my daughter. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "Did you feel like this?" I looked at her. Yes. She stared at the floor. "I don't know what's real anymore." My heart broke, because I remembered exactly that feeling. The moment when love and doubt begin fighting each other. The moment when trust becomes fear. The moment when your future suddenly becomes uncertain. I reached for her hand. "You don't have to decide everything today." She started crying again. "I defended him." "I know. I said terrible things to you." I squeezed her hand. "I know. I thought you were trying to ruin my life." I felt tears in my own eyes. "I know." She looked at me. "Why didn't you stop me?" I almost laughed through the tears. Because mothers ask themselves that question every day. Why didn't I stop her? Why didn't I tell her sooner? Why didn't I protect her? The truth was painful, because eventually our children become adults, and adults must walk towards certain lessons themselves. That evening, Emily came home with me, not because she had nowhere else to go, because she didn't want to be alone. As we drove through the dark Ohio roads, neither of us spoke much. At one point, she quietly asked, "Did you ever love Dad after everything?" I looked at the road. For a while. Why? Because people don't stop loving someone the same day they stop trusting them. She nodded slowly. I still love Jason. The honesty surprised me, but it shouldn't have. Pain does not erase love. Sometimes it makes love even more confusing. When we arrived at my house, Emily walked into the kitchen and stopped. The old documents still covered the dining room table. Daniel, Rebecca, court records, debt notices, years of silence. She sat down. For nearly 2 hours we read everything together. She asked questions. Some I answered, some I couldn't. Several times she cried. Several times I cried with her. When she reached Daniel's final letter, she stopped. He blamed you. Yes. After everything, yes. She looked down. Jason said something similar last week. My stomach tightened. What? He said I was creating stress. I looked at her. He said if I trusted him, more things would be easier. The room became quiet. Because I had heard those words before. Trust me. Support me. Believe me. And when things go wrong, it becomes your fault. The following morning, Emily returned to the condominium. She wanted to collect her things. I offered to go with her. She shook her head. I need to do this myself. I understood. Several hours passed. I waited nervously. Finally, my phone rang. Her voice sounded exhausted. I'm coming over. Are you okay? There was silence. Then, he was angry. My heart stopped. Did he hurt you? No. But he was angry. I sat down. What happened? She took a deep breath. He said I embarrassed him. I closed my eyes. He said my mother manipulated me. Tears filled my eyes. He said Rebecca lied. Did he explain the documents? No. What did he explain? She laughed softly, the same sad laugh Rebecca had used. He explained why everything wasn't his fault. My chest hurt, because that was exactly how it had happened with Daniel. That evening, Emily arrived carrying 3 boxes. Clothes, books, photographs, the silver bracelet, the one she had stopped wearing. She placed it on the kitchen table. I found it. I smiled softly. She looked at it for a long time. I can't believe I stopped wearing it. I picked it up. People change. She shook her head. No. Her eyes filled. I was changing into someone else. Over the next several days, reality began arriving. A lawyer reviewed the business documents. The personal guarantee had not yet been signed, thank God. Several financial accounts were already connected. Emily would lose money. Not everything, but enough. Thousands of dollars, investments, deposits, wedding expenses. The future she imagined was disappearing. One evening, she sat beside me on the porch. The sun was setting. For the first time in weeks, the house felt peaceful. She spoke quietly. I'm sorry. I looked at her. You don't have to apologize. Yes, I do. She wiped away tears. I called you old-fashioned. I smiled gently. I am old-fashioned. She laughed softly. No. She looked toward the trees. I think you were trying to save me. The words I had waited months to hear. Not because I needed to be right, because I needed her to understand. I reached for her hand. I made mistakes too. She nodded. But you survived them. We sat quietly. Then she looked at me. Do you think he'll do this again? I thought about Rebecca, about Daniel, about the years between them. Finally, I answered honestly. I don't know. She nodded. Neither of us spoke, because the answer no longer mattered as much. What mattered was that my daughter had come home, not to the house, to the truth. And for the first time since the engagement dinner, I realized something. Perhaps losing Jason was not the worst thing that had happened to Emily. Perhaps believing him had not been the greatest mistake. Perhaps the real danger had been losing herself. And now, slowly, painfully, she was beginning to find herself again. Winter arrived earlier than usual that year. By the middle of November, the trees outside my house had become completely bare and thin layers of frost covered the grass every morning. Emily had been living with me for almost 6 weeks. At first, we moved around each other carefully. She slept in her old bedroom. I cooked breakfast. We watched television in the evenings. Some conversations lasted hours. Others lasted only minutes. Healing, I learned, does not happen all at once. It arrives quietly, one ordinary day at a time. Jason called several times during the first week. Emily never answered. Then came the emails, long explanations, apologies, promises. He said he loved her. He said everything had been misunderstood. He said the investment plans had been honest. He said Rebecca had lied. He said I had manipulated the situation. Most importantly, he said he deserved another chance. Emily read every message. Then she deleted them. One evening, she sat beside me at the kitchen table. Snow had begun falling outside. She stared into her tea. Do you think people change? I considered the question. Sometimes. What about men like Jason? I thought about Daniel, about years, about regret. Finally, I answered honestly. People only change when they accept responsibility. She nodded. He never did. No. She looked down. Neither did Dad. No. The room became quiet. For the first time in her life, Emily was beginning to understand who her father had truly been. Not the man she imagined, not the man I had softened. The real man. And somehow that truth hurt both of us. A week before Christmas, Emily received the final financial reports. She lost nearly $30,000. Wedding deposits, investments, joint expenses, money she had spent believing she was building a future. She cried in my kitchen, not because of the money, because of what it represented. Lost trust, lost time, lost dreams. I sat beside her. She wiped her eyes. I feel stupid. I shook my head. No. I should have known. So should I. She looked at me. You were younger. I smiled sadly. Pain doesn't care about age. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, Were you ashamed? The question surprised me. Yes. For how long? I looked around the kitchen, at the walls, the photographs, the years. 35 years. Her eyes widened. Why? I took a breath. Because I believed intelligent women weren't supposed to make mistakes. She began crying again. So did I. That was the moment everything finally changed. Not when she left Jason, not when she removed the ring, not when she came home. This. Two women sitting in the same kitchen, separated by 35 years, understanding that they had both believed the same lie, that mistakes make us weak, that trust makes us foolish, that love makes us naive. But perhaps none of those things were true. Perhaps loving someone simply means taking a risk. And sometimes people misuse that trust. The failure belongs to them, not us. Several days before Christmas, Emily asked me something unexpected. Can we visit Grandma's grave? My mother had passed away 12 years earlier. Emily had always loved her. We drove to the cemetery on a cold afternoon. The wind moved gently through the trees. Snow covered parts of the ground. Emily stood quietly beside the headstone. For several minutes, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "She tried to warn you." I nodded. "Yes." "Did you forgive her?" I smiled softly. There was nothing to forgive. Emily looked down. "I think I understand her now." Tears filled my eyes. Because she did, finally. She understood what mothers sometimes become. The inconvenient voice. The unwanted truth. The person who risked losing love to protect someone they love. As we walked back toward the car, she took my hand, something she had not done since childhood. "I was angry at you." "I know. I thought you wanted to control me." I squeezed her hand. "I know." She stopped walking. "But you were trying to give me something." "What?" She looked at me. "Your mistake." I frowned. "My mistake? So I wouldn't have to make it myself." I could not speak, because she had finally understood what I had struggled to explain for months. Experience is not control. Warnings are not judgment. And love sometimes sounds very different from approval. Christmas arrived quietly. No wedding, no invitations, no flowers, no engagement ring. Instead, there was snow. There was Helen. There was banana bread. There were old movies. There was laughter. And there was my daughter. On Christmas morning, Emily handed me a small box. Inside was the silver bracelet, the one from my grandmother. She smiled. "I had it repaired." I looked at her. "Why?" She fastened it around her wrist. "Because it belongs to my family." Tears filled my eyes. She smiled. "And because I like it." For the first time in months, I saw my daughter completely. Not someone's fiancée, not someone's future wife, not someone's investment partner. Simply Emily. Several months later, spring returned. Emily moved into a small apartment across town. She began seeing friends again. She returned to painting. She volunteered at a community center. Slowly, her life became her own again. One Sunday afternoon, she came to my house carrying coffee. We sat on the porch watching the sunset. She suddenly laughed. "What?" She smiled. "Remember when I called you old-fashioned?" I laughed softly. "Very clearly." She shook her head. "You know what I think now." "What?" She looked toward the sky. "I think you weren't old-fashioned." I waited. "You were simply older." I smiled. "And wiser." She laughed. "Sometimes." The sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she leaned her head against my shoulder, just as she had when she was a little girl. Thank you. For what? For refusing to stay quiet. The tears came one last time, because sometimes children grow up, sometimes they leave, sometimes they repeat our mistakes. But occasionally, if love is patient enough, if truth survives long enough, if forgiveness remains possible, they come back. Not to the same life, not to the same beliefs, but to each other. And as I sat beside my daughter that evening, I realized something. My greatest mistake had not been trusting the wrong man. It had been believing my mistakes made me unworthy to teach my daughter. The truth was exactly the opposite. My mistakes became the bridge that finally brought us home.